Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, depending where you're joining from. Thanks for taking the time and joining us today. We're going to be talking about generating marketing insights with Google's Ads Data Hub, or ADH, as you'll hear it referred to quite a bit, which is Google's data clean room. So, what you can expect from today, I'll do a quick intro on what you're going to get out of the next hour. We'll talk about data clean rooms in general, why they should be on your radar, and why specifically we think Ads Data Hub needs to be there as well. And then I'll hand it over to my colleague Nick, who will actually walk you through a few use cases that are pretty tactical and really great that you can test out at some of your first pilots. So give a quick intro of myself. My name is Robin. I'm the Executive Director here at 55 in the US. I'm responsible for the consulting team here as well as overall portfolio of client delivery. And also on with my colleague Nick, based in the UK. Give you a brief intro in case you're not familiar with 55. 55 is a data company founded about 10 years ago now, coming up on our 10-year anniversary in Paris from actually a bunch of ex-Google executives. Now we are made up of 300 global experts spanning data analysis, data science, data engineering, more traditional software engineers. So we cover the full stack, the full spectrum, front of the house, back of the house for all data needs. We generally work with large multinationals, global companies who have a mix of both organizational as well as technical and data needs, data challenges that they need solved. And we're also part of a brand tech ecosystem, so we're part of the You and Mr. Jones group. So today, we're going to quickly talk about what data clean rooms are, why they matter, and why they're becoming part of the marketer's toolkit, and specifically dive into Google's Ads Data Hub. So then we're going to move into more tactical, how to pick the right use case, because you want to show lift and you want to show incremental gain early when you're testing out new technology. So we want to walk you through how to do that successfully. And then if we have time, we'll also open up for a Q&A in the end. And then you can expect to hear from us after this as well. We'll be sending out the session deck and the recording. We're going to also be sending out our white paper, which covers everything we talk about today in more detail. We have a lot of thought leadership and also just definitions, anything you're curious about on our Tea House, so you can access that. And then, of course, you can reach us on LinkedIn, send me an email. Don't be shy. All right, so what is a data clean room and why are we here talking about it today? Data clean rooms have been around for a while now, I think almost 3 years, maybe a little longer, but they've evolved quite a bit up until that time. So if you take a step back, what makes a technology fail or succeed? You know, if you look at a TMS that was wildly successful, it's now ubiquitous, everyone has one, versus, I don't know, DMPs, right? Like on the exit now, and everyone's talking about what CDP should I get and how should I position that? So there needs to be a perfect storm of factors that come into play. So if you think externally, you have things like industry trends and regulatory pressures. Think about CCPA in the US, which just as of about a week ago now is really kicked in. The grace period is over. Companies need to get on board of that. You also have marketplace and competitive factors. So if you think about the big movers and shakers, the decisions that they're making, you have Google, Facebook, Amazon, just to name a few. The most obvious example that recently came up was the third-party cookie announcement. No longer will we be able to track users using third-party cookies, which impacts a ton of different marketing tactics and use cases. And then lastly, we also have to think about consumers and what their expectations are with regards to opting in, with privacy, how they want their data shared or not. So you need to take these three factors into account, which really lends itself to the entrance of, or the emergence of, data clean rooms. And it really gives them staying power. So before we dive into ADH, let's talk about data clean rooms really quickly. What is it? It is a privacy-safe, closed environment. It's a cloud-based place where marketers can actually access a lot of really, really granular impression level data, for example, from a walled garden, that they can't actually see within their normal MarTech ecosystems. They can connect their pipes from, for example, within the GMP stack, native pipes from DV360, from Campaign Manager, input that data, and then also match it with their own first-party data in a privacy-safe way. So you have different campaign measurement granularity than you had before. You have different audience activation that you can do now that you couldn't do previously. So it really gives marketers the ability to get granular enough where they now have more control over things, for example, like their media plans, and they can actually understand more granularly how their marketing dollars are being spent and how effective that fourth time we hit a consumer was. Like, where was the optimal cap? So you can reallocate dollars in that way as well. Taking a step back, all the major players now are coming out with their own data clean rooms. So I think that's also a pretty good indicator that they're here to stay. So Google's is Ads Data Hub, and you can see it's already very well connected to the full GMP stack. It's also a bridge to GCP. You're using BigQuery, so it's a nice addition to the toolkit that helps navigate both GMP and GCP well. You also have Facebook Analytics, so Facebook's clean room is coming out as well. It's a little more nascent, and same with Amazon Marketing Cloud. And you, of course, Alibaba is doing one, you have Target, you have a few other ones as well. So everyone's experimenting. What's really interesting is that some brands are actually trying to build their own and see what they can do with their own data clean rooms. That's actually pretty ambitious, and it's awesome if you have the right skill sets and the right profiles in terms of like data engineering and analysis and science. But that's new. So the reason we're here today is to actually focus on Ads Data Hub, or ADH. So Ads Data Hub is Google's version of a data clean room. It's the best known and also the most advanced data clean room today. It has actually gone through a series of evolutions over the past 3 years in order to get it this far. So it's gone through a bunch of iterations from being not so user-friendly to actually very user-friendly and starting to be templatized in a way. It started off very basic, measuring YouTube. It evolved as GDPR came out to incorporate the needs and asks brands had to adapt to a privacy by design. And now it's a really great way, with the loss of third-party cookies, to continue audience activation, as well as do a lot more really, really granular measurement in terms of reach and frequency, ad impact, frequency of ads, all that. Brands are really starting to be able to impact their media strategy and their media spend across different channels in a lot more granular ways now than they used to. And we've seen this a lot over the last year. A lot of our clients are starting to experiment with this, but it's really ramped up in the last 3 to 6 months, and I think it's been spurred a lot by the announcement of Google going away from third-party cookies. So marketers are really trying to test how they can measure, and especially in today's environment, measurement of media effectiveness is becoming super important. So at Ubisoft, for example, we are able to quantify the impact of ad frequency on video completion. So really identifying what the sweet spot was, how many ad exposures were required for a user to complete watching a video, which is tied to a lot of really important KPIs and other outcomes. So we are able to find out what that number is, and then in turn, Ubisoft can turn around and actually adjust their media spend or their media strategy accordingly and reallocate dollars to more effective use, which is pretty cool, really effective. So what we generally recommend is that as you're recalibrating your marketing roadmap from now all the way through 2020, 2021, to look at where the gaps are, or look at where you're going to have to start changing your marketing tactics. Maybe you were doing attribution one way, maybe you were doing measurement one way, and now you need to experiment with new technology. Ads Data Hub is great for that. So we'd recommend starting with something like frequency management, frequency capture or capping, maybe moving into real-time audience activation, and then depending on how mature the cross-functional teams are, you can start doing things like measuring DCO and creative variance using ADH. So it also depends a lot on who the internal teams are, because you need the marketing team, the data science team, the data engineering team, who are generally pretty cross-functional across most brands and a little bit siloed, to speak the same language. So you need a really strong sponsor, and also would recommend using a strong partner to help navigate the right processes, the right handoffs, making sure the right KPIs and outcomes are being captured as well. So Ads Data Hub is not for everyone, but it is for a lot of people or a lot of brands. So just a quick checklist to determine whether or not it makes sense for you. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to where you're spending in terms of your advertising. So if you are spending a lot on Google's marketing platform, on GMP, then ADH is probably the right fit for you. It's a no-brainer. If most of your dollars are going, I don't know, to Amazon or somewhere else, then you should probably figure out whether it makes sense and look at a different data cleaner. Then you want to make sure that the pilot you're testing is something you can't actually measure using Campaign Manager or using the GMP stack as it is. So optimal frequency capping and segment overlap is great. ADH is awesome at that. Understanding frequency of ad exposure on a certain goal, that's great. ADH is great for that. And then lastly, having the right, kind of mentioned previously, but having the right profiles is super important in order to get this right, because you need someone who is very fluent in the MarTech stack, in measurement, in SQL, and also cloud technologies. So it's a very specific profile, and then they need to be able to cross-functionally speak the same languages as the other teams that they're working across. So now I'm going to pass it over to Nick to talk about what kinds of use cases make sense, especially to get the first one or two right, so that you can show incremental lift.
Hi guys. So hopefully you can all hear me. So my name's Nick, and sorry for some of the technical issues we're having, but hopefully you're still with us. And so what I'll do now is take you through some of the more specific steps in terms of how to run a successful ADH project. So before we dive into some of the details, it'd be good to sort of bring up a couple of points up front. So one of them being around ADH being more suitable for enterprise level clients and really sort of advanced brands and really sophisticated use cases. And for now, we don't really see that as really being the case. So Ads Data Hub is also really applicable for more emerging and nascent brands, especially when you're looking at specific use cases or trying to answer questions that can't always be answered within the native GMP platform. So, for example, reaching frequency or the impact of viewability on your conversion rates, for example. And so all of these different types of questions are very applicable in an ADH world and are actually relatively simple to set up and run. And so here we have a few different convictions on what we see as being really important in terms of delivering a successful ADH project. And I guess sort of another common sort of misconception that we see with many of our clients is that using ADH itself can often be really hard or tricky. And actually, in actual fact, sort of using the ADH platform itself is probably the easiest part of the entire project itself. The actually much more difficult bit is getting all the right people and processes in place to actually make sure that your project actually works and you get what you achieve. So, and one of the main reasons is that within Ads Data Hub, it's not simply someone with SQL skill sets that you need to actually set up and run those queries. Alongside that, you'll also need someone with really strong knowledge of the different Ads Data Hub tables. So whether that's from Campaign Manager or DV360, for example, they'll need to understand how the different fields and dimensions are set up and exactly what types of areas you'll need to be adding to your query to make sure that you can answer your question. And outside of this, you'll also, depending on the exact use case you're looking for, you might need to bring in some of the media agency partners or the client's in-house team to understand how their accounts are actually set up. So for example, if you're doing some YouTube analysis, you'll need to know where is TrueView activity being bought. Is it within Google Ads or DV360? And if so, what kind of TrueView activity are you buying? Are you running discovery ads? Do you have skippable and non-skip ads? And also, what is the actual structure of that campaign itself? And all that contextual information you'll need from different members across different teams. So it's gathering all of those different skill sets and expertise together to bring all this into play and make sure that everyone understands exactly what they're doing and how this all fits into one another. So that's really one of our sort of key convictions around setting up an ADH project. Next is around being really clear on exactly what you're trying to solve and what the success metrics look like. So this is primarily because ADH isn't simply an interface where you can drag and drop and slice and dice data. In order to get out of something useful out of ADH, you need to be really specific and granular in terms of what you're actually trying to extract from the platform itself. So the more detailed you can be in your question, the better your actual outputs from the tool will be as well. And next, ensuring that you have a plan in place after your actual analysis and outputs from the platform. So this is really, really important. So the outputs of ADH are more often than not some sort of analysis or insight. And I think we've all seen many occasions or have many examples of clients having nice insights or pretty dashboards which are looked at once or twice at the beginning, but then afterwards are quickly forgotten about and never actually enabled or activated within their campaigns. So again, it's really important up front within your project to define exactly what you're going to do with these insights and how you're going to then test and implement them within your campaign setup moving forwards. And so, yeah, again, you should be really, really specific about exactly what you're trying to find and be able to actually make sure that these can be activated in the long run. So of all these different reasons, so we really think that when you're running your first few ADH projects, you should consider working with a partner or especially someone who has experience of using the platform already. So this is so that you can make sure that the right frameworks and processes are embedded and that your brands and teams sort of get a base understanding of how to use the platform itself and what the different requirements are from the different teams so that you can then take it on in-house moving forwards and start using the tools yourself as well. So yeah, like we mentioned up top, so defining those roles and responsibilities across the different stakeholders is one of the most important parts of this project. So here we have a nice, pretty shiny RACI which shows you how these roles are split up across the different stakeholders. And I'm sure you've all seen a lot of these different types of RACI matrices, and often they can be a little bit boring and not always super necessary, but in this instance, it's actually really, really important in an ADH world. So again, like I mentioned, this is because of all the different types of skill sets and roles required to run this type of mission. So outside of requiring the technical skill set to actually write the SQL query code itself, you'll also need to involve your media agency or your client brand teams as well. You might also need a data scientist if you're looking to run sort of more advanced or sophisticated use cases. You might need to bring in your client's legal teams or agency legal teams when you're getting permissions to begin with to actually get access to the right platforms to connect it to Ads Data Hub. And also if you're looking to join additional data sets to your media data, again, you might need to bring in other teams within your brand or your company. So all of these different roles, lots of different skill sets, and bringing them all together to make sure everyone's aligned in terms of the project roles, the timelines, and exactly who's responsible for what is really important to define up front. So in terms of delivering a successful pilot, we have a sort of 4-step program in which you can enable this. So this isn't anything too groundbreaking. Sort of the key takeout here is that rather than what we normally recommend in terms of defining the right use case up front, we actually recommend to connect the data beforehand, and that should be your first point of call before you do anything else. And sort of the main reason for that is that due to the nature of how ADH is set up, you don't actually get any data flowing into the platform for you to analyze and query until you actually connect the media tools into the platform itself. So this is why, you obviously want as much data as possible within the tool set before you run your query. So again, upfront, you want to connect all the platforms into the tool as soon as you can. So this is a sort of top line overview of the actual architecture within ADH. So on the left-hand side, you can see you'll have all the various data sources which feed into Ads Data Hub. So your primary source will be Campaign Manager. So this will be where you host most of your media activity in terms of impressions, clicks and conversions and so on. And also if you've actually linked CM to your other GMB tools, like Search Ads 360 or DV360 as well, you'll have access to all of that search and programmatic results as well. So CM should definitely be sort of your primary platform that you connect first. And then once you've done that, you can start to link those other tools as well. And then once you've actually linked those tools together, it will then flow into Ads Data Hub through a specific BigQuery platform. And then so ADH itself is where you will be able to query that user level data based on the media tools that you've linked to it, of which the aggregated results are then sent into a separate BigQuery project. And within that separate BigQuery project, you can also then join it with other data sets. So it could be your own first-party data, it could be anything else, and then you can actually send it back into ADH for further querying if required. Yep, so like I said, first point of call is make sure that you link all the platforms into ADH as soon as possible. And so link Campaign Manager first and then all the other platforms afterwards. And then the next step will be to then get a really good understanding of the actual account architecture for those platforms you've linked. So this is where you'll most likely need to involve your different media agencies or the in-house brand teams to get a really good understanding of how that structure and that setup is sorted out. So especially when it comes to naming conventions and taxonomy, that's really important for you to be able to understand what you're actually analyzing and what kind of results you can expect to get out of it. So for example, if you're trying to run an analysis between prospect and retargeting, you'll need to be able to understand how or that is differentiated within the setup. Is it within a campaign name? Do you use a placement naming convention? Is it actually in the advertiser structure? And again, is that structure consistent so that you can be sure when you pull results for a particular advertiser, it only contains prospecting data and not a mixture of retargeting as well, which might end up skewing your results. So getting all that information upfront and aligned with your media agency is super important. So after that, you'll need to set up your cloud setup. And this, to be honest, is actually pretty simple. So it's simply setting up a dedicated BigQuery project and linking that with ADH. And so again, you might need to involve your client's IT team in order to get this set up, but the actual process itself is really simple. And so this will be where all your outputs of your ADH queries will sit and live. And then that's where you can use it for further processing or even visualization later down the line. And in this BigQuery setup is also where you'll be able to join or ingest additional first-party data sets as well. So there are various different use cases for this. So whatever you're trying to do, the key goal or the key point to remember is that you'll need to be able to match your existing first-party data world with the Campaign Manager online cookie world. So there are many different ways you can do this, but sort of one of the key or most simplest ways is to match some sort of ID with your first-party data set and Campaign Manager. So one of the classic first-party data use cases is joining your analytics toolset into ADH. So if, for example, you want to bring in Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics data into CM, what you can do is pass your analytics client ID into a campaign manager floodlight, and so insert that into a custom floodlight variable, and that will enable you to join your first-party Adobe data with CM data, for example, and then you can start to do some really cool media and analytics use cases, such as sort of paid or organic comparisons and analysis. Cool. So once you've actually linked all the different platforms into ADH, the next step is to actually design the use case itself. So as you can see, there are lots of different. Sorry, I've just got to notice that I'm not necessarily on the right screen. Hopefully I am. But yeah, I'll carry on for now. So as you can see, there are lots of different use cases that you can enable within ADH. This isn't a fully comprehensive list, but are some of the key sort of areas that you can start to get up and running within ADH as the more fundamental use cases or applications. And as you can see, it's applicable to both brand and performance marketers. And so in a brand world, you can understand, for example, how ad frequency impacts video rates, video completion rates, or on-site behavior. And you can also look at the publisher overlap in your display activity in terms of how many users on site A are also available on site B, for example. And in the performance marketing world, you can look at things like the impact of viewable impressions on your conversion rate. So by removing non-viewable ads, you can understand sort of how that impacts conversion performance across your different publishers. And as you can see, most of these use cases are primarily analysis-based, but there are also certain sort of more practical activation examples, primarily through the native linking between ADH and DV360. So the main application for this is the lower latency you have in terms of audience population within audiences that are set up in ADH, especially when you compare it to other GMP tools, including GA360, for example. So your audiences in ADH will actually update much quicker than other tool sets. And so this will be really useful if your client is looking to implement or activate their first-party data in a more reactive manner. So, for example, if they have built propensity models or they have more time-sensitive messaging that they want to enable, then ADH retargeting or activation can be really useful in this case. And so when you define your use case for Ads Data Hub, it's just as important to understand what isn't possible in the tool and what you can actually already do in other platforms, including the GMP tools themselves. So I won't go through every example in this list in terms of what ADH can or can't do, but some of the key takeouts are that, for example, there is no cross-device functionality or capability right now in ADH. So all the cool cross-device stuff you can do in GMP today around cross-environment conversions or real unique reach will still have to be done in the GMP tools themselves for now. And similarly, anything you do around sort of the offline CM API, that still has to remain in the GMP world for now. So you're not able to query any of those fields within the ADH schema today yet. So the key takeout here is to really understand exactly what your question is and whether it can actually already be answered in some of the GMP tools. So we really recommend to only use ADH if it's the only place you can actually enable your specific use case, and not try to be too clever and replicate what you can actually already do elsewhere. So once you've started to get a better idea of exactly what area you want to look at or analyze, then you'll need to really drill down and hone in your specific use case. And a common sort of tool or technique we use is to write out that entire use case within a specific sentence. So, for example, as a marketer, you're looking to measure video completions by looking at the correlation between completion rates and the number of exposures that a specific user is exposed to for a certain line item. And once you start to map out these different variables, you can really start to drill down in terms of what each of these parts actually mean. So if we're looking at video completions in this instance, it's really important to define what that actually means. So is it simply a true view? Are we looking at a 30-second ad view? Are we looking at the entire completion of the video itself? And if so, what does that actually mean in terms of the different video activities or video types that we're running? So in your TrueView setup, for example, are you running bumper ads? And if so, because it's simply a non-skippable 6-second ad, you might not necessarily want to include that in your analysis because it's actually going to skew your results due to its 100% completion rate. And then if so, where are your bumper ads actually set up within your campaign? Are they all in a specific line item or insertion order for you to exclude when you run your ADH query? And so to get this kind of information, this is where, again, you might need to bring in your media agency team or your in-house brand marketing team to get that sort of more contextual information around how your campaign is set up. And if we go through another example, so similarly for a performance marketer, if someone wants to look at how likely additional users are to convert when they're exposed to a certain sequence of acquisition and remarketing ads for a given e-com KPI. So again, you really want to hone in and really specify exactly what each of those parameters actually mean. So when we talk about e-commerce KPI, what kind of specific goal are we looking at? Does that tie to a specific floodlight activity or a G8 goal, for example? And again, when we talk about acquisition and retargeting ads, what campaigns are they set up in? What is the naming convention that will really easily allow us to specifically define or denote those type of ads when we run our query? So once you've outlined all these specifics, you'll be then to be able to build out a really super detailed outline of the use case itself. So here for example, you specify the exact attribution window, the brand, the objective, the granularity, testing outputs of how you'll actually activate these results once you run your analysis. And then this outline can then be shared with all the different stakeholders in the project so that everyone's super clear on exactly what the parameters and scope of the use case is, what you are and actually more importantly not going to include, and then how you then going to use these results to feed into your test and learn plan afterwards. Cool. And so so once you've done all the hard work in terms of getting all the tools set up, you've defined your exact use case, you've got a really super detailed plan that you've shared with everyone, you're actually ready to get your hands dirty and, to be honest, do the more fun bit for me anyway, in terms of logging into ADH and writing some queries. So for those who haven't used or seen ADH before, it's not an interface in the sense of the other GMP tools where you can simply drag and drop and quickly pull reports and insights out of the platform. It's more similar to something like BigQuery, for example, where it's primarily SQL based, and you need to write specific queries and code to actually pull and analyze the data from your media tools itself. But if you ever use something like BigQuery, you should be very familiar with its structure, and it's actually not too difficult really to use. So when it comes to writing your queries, so as you can see on this slide, the sandbox environment is going to be your best friend. So this is where you're able to test all of your different queries and practice or get a better understanding of the ADH datasets themselves before you then run them against your live datasets. So there's a couple of reasons why you want to do this. So first is make sure that you actually understand the specific fields and dimensions that you want to include within your query. And then next is around the different privacy checks that exist within ADH. So ADH itself, because of its sort of privacy-centric focus, has lots of different checks at various levels to make sure that you're not necessarily exposing the user ID in certain ways. So one of the most basic checks is a static check to ensure that you don't actually extract or pull any specific user IDs within your query. So even though it might technically be correct in SQL, if you try to run a query that extracts user IDs from the tool, it will reject it and it won't actually let you run that specific query for obvious reasons. Another type of check it does is at a more aggregate level. So again, when you write certain queries, Some of your results might be really specific and include only a certain number of users. So if your outputs for your queries involve users less or include a row with less than 50 users, ADH will actually again decline your query because of its privacy limitations. So here you might need to use certain functions like row merge, for example, to pass these different privacy features and actually aggregate your results upwards. And another sort of privacy check it does is around historical query checks. So this is to prevent you querying the same data set and time frame over multiple times and querying the same data set over and over again. And again, this is to avoid sort of any exploitation in terms of trying to extract user level IDs or get outputs at a more granular level than ADH will allow. So it actually keeps a record of all the different queries that you run against live data sets. And if you keep running it again and again over the same time period, it will actually start dropping rows as a result, and you actually might even remove all results from your queries if you try to run it too many times. So this is why we would recommend to always test it in your sandbox first. And try to run as few queries against your data set as possible. So where you can, try to be relatively broad in terms of your overall ADH query itself, export that into BigQuery, and then do all your filtering and processing there. And so this is so that you're not having to frequently go back into ADH and run loads of different queries because you didn't quite get what you wanted the first time. And another important consideration is if you're working with lots of different team members in terms of using the actual ADH platform itself. So if you have lots of different people writing different queries, you want to make sure that they're all aligned and not running the same query data sets against the same timeframes alongside each other. You want to be upfront and clearly define that this person's going to run this query, that person's going to run that query, so that there's minimal overlap. And you don't fall into any of those historical privacy checks that ADH runs. Nice. So once you've ran your amazing query and you've got nice shiny outputs, you'll have what you'll see is different data sets within BigQuery itself. So that's the actual output from ADH rather than any nice chart or insight itself. So once it's in BigQuery, you can then run further processing to either filter or do any further calculations to your results. You can even join it with other data sets and push it back into ADH if you like. But once you have that final table itself, you'll then want to make sure it's in a nice dashboard visualization so that it's very easily shareable and clear in terms of other stakeholders around the actual insights and recommendations that you've been able to see in the platform itself. And so here we would recommend to use Data Studio because of its native linking with BigQuery. So again, it's really easy to set up. I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with the platform itself. And sort of one of the key benefits is that it's really easy to create nice, clear charts and then share that with other stakeholders in your teams to give those really clear recommendations and next steps in terms of your ADH outputs. And so how do you move ADH from pilot to production? So again, like we mentioned up front, the last thing you want is to have a nice shiny dashboard that no one looks at and gets quickly forgotten after a couple of weeks. So what you want to do is make sure that you've defined a test and run phase within your project. And that means actually activating the results that you find or you've discovered through your analysis. And so where possible, we normally recommend to leverage the different experiment and lift tools within the GMP toolsets. So for example, within Google Ads and DV360, there are some really nice experiment features that you can use to create really easy A/B tests to activate your results and actually validate the hypotheses that you've been able to generate from your analysis outputs. And this is really useful because you don't really necessarily need to completely rip up your existing campaign setup to try and to test out this new hypotheses. These in-platform features let you control the significance and the KPIs so that you can be really clear on how successful your test is and whether it's worth actually implementing into your campaign setup moving forwards. And so assuming you've had a successful test and learn phase and everyone's really happy with the ADH insights, and you've actually moved forward and implemented it within your campaign setup. You want to move it fully into production, and that means automation. So this is something we do a lot at 55, and in an ADH world, that specifically means using the ADH API. So this will automate all of the queries that you've set up within ADH. So for example, if you've set up a frequency use case and identified that, for example, it's better to show a user 5 ads instead of 6 ads for a certain campaign, you can automate that that analysis to see in the next month, in the next campaign, does that number still hold? Is it now 7 ads is actually the best frequency or the most optimal frequency that you should be showing users? And here you'll also need to use some of the other GCP tools as well in certain circumstances, such as Compute Engine or Cloud Function, to fully automate this process and make sure that this is actually properly embedded within your campaign workflow and doesn't become simply just another nice use case for your client. And so this is where you can actually sort of truly embed it within your overall sort of campaign and data architecture and make sure it has a proper impact in terms of your overall brand and campaign performance. Cool. And so, yeah, so this is sort of a broad outline of how it all works in terms of an ADH project, and in terms of a wider context, you want to make sure that all the insights that you've got out of your particular use case feed back into your overall marketing roadmap and tie in very nicely with the various other work streams that you have as part of your broader data strategy. Great, so that pretty much covers what we wanted to go through today. Let me just see if we have any questions. Doesn't look like it at this stage. Nice. Cool. So next bit is to go through some of our marketing obligations. So as Robin mentioned earlier, we also have an ADH white paper that has really nice information about Editor Data Hub, including a lot of stuff we talked about today and a lot more as well. So that's available for you to download in your own time for a nice bit of lockdown reading. We also have other webinars that you can watch as well. So if you like, this session will be recorded for you to watch again at a later date if you want, alongside other previous webinars that we've also done. So I know we recently did a really cool webinar on Google Analytics Atlas Web that is well worth a watch if you haven't seen it already, and there are lots of other really, really useful videos as well for you to check out. And then finally, we have our award-winning, I believe, Tea House, which has all the latest articles and thought leadership pieces written by very smart members of our team. So again, yeah, definitely worth checking out if you have a spare moment or two. Lots of interesting articles there to read as well. Great. And yeah, that's everything from us today. Yeah, apologies again for some of the slight technical issues. Hopefully this was useful and clear for everyone. And yeah, thanks a lot for your time. And yeah, do feel free to drop either Robin or myself any questions if you have any. And yeah, thanks again.